morning. I'm going to talk about the predatory mites for organic thrips control in high tunnel cucumbers. When the call for the symposium went out for proceedings, I took it fairly seriously in terms of trying to create something that was scientifically valid to have published. So the title and some of the content is a bit narrow in scope. I'm going to try to broaden it out so it's of interest to as many people as possible. Not specifically only on predatory mites for thrips control in cucumbers. Well, that is what my proceedings
Judd, I don't think your mic is working.
You don't think so?
You have a little better?
Yeah. Turn the volume up.
The mic is a little closer.
Left side.
But only if you're standing on the right.
Yeah, if you're right on the
Have one foot.
Better? Better? Better, Fred?
Yeah.
A little bit? Yeah? Well, I'm sorry if you missed what I said because it was the best introduction ever. You'll have to go online and download the audio. Okay, let's see. Do you know if this is working?
Yeah. My count's off.
Comes off.
This thing is receptive here.
Okay, so maybe I should do it.
Go where?
Technology.
I'm not having much luck.
There we go.
So, organic pest control in protected agriculture and high tunnels, we'll talk about them a little bit, but I want to broaden that definition as much as I can. Talk about things, vegetable crops that we grow under plastic and steel and wood. And I'm calling that protected agriculture. I mentioned I'm looking at a narrow scope for the purpose of these proceedings. However, when we talk about organic pest control in high tunnel vegetables, we have to take a big picture approach. So we have a number of tools, cultural tools, prevention, sanitation, exclusion, plant resistance, grafting for certain vegetables, rotation, and then within the world of organic agriculture we do have approved sprays we can use, and then beneficials for biological control. So in 2007, we got started, my program, I worked for the Cornell Vegetable Program, on a SARE-funded project called Natural Pest Management in high tunnel greenhouse vegetables. And over the course of 3 years, we did a lot of outreach and research, trying to move farmers who were growing in greenhouses and high tunnels into natural, biological, or organic pest control. So, in tunnels, first of all, what is a tunnel? If I use that term, I just mean kind of a low-input greenhouse, maybe a single layer of plastic without heat or fans, so it's vented and heated passively. And then there's gradations up to a greenhouse, and I'm not very dogmatic about that. So that's our working definition of a high tunnel. Some of the pests we work with: thrips, spider mites, aphids, white flies, worms, slugs. Let's start with that first tool, cultural control. So before we think about spending money on anything, there are many things we can do as managers: sanitation, physical exclusion, pruning, and then temperature and moisture management to a more limited degree based on what level of technology we adopt for our tunnel or our greenhouse. Let's start with sanitation. This is kind of one of the hot things in high tunnels or greenhouses right now, are movable structures. So this is movable. We'll talk about that later. But sanitation, for me, what I would like to start with is, how am I dealing with weeds? And here, this farmer just built the structure, and he put down this black landscape fabric on either side of the wall. You can do this on a stationary tunnel as well. And the point is there, we're keeping weeds down. Why? Because weeds are contributing to our insect pests, which is what I'm here to talk about today. You might think about drainage. A wetter soil is going to have more problems with fungus gnats and shore flies. Exclusion. Here's another one of those cultural controls we can take. We've also done a lot of research looking at having hanging baskets of petunias over top of a determinate story of tomatoes. Whether that's a good idea or not is another presentation. But for pest control, is this a good idea? Any ideas? What do you think?
No.
Yes? We're always talking about diversity, right? People are always asking me about, could I plant marigolds or buckwheat outside of this thing? Well, this is a high-risk situation for flowering annuals above a tomato crop, because these are very attractive to thrips, which we're going to talk about today, and they also harbor a couple of important diseases: tobacco patient's necrotic spot virus, tomato spotted wilt virus, which can move from these petunias down to the tomatoes very easily. And somewhere around 5 years ago, they discovered that late blight, that famous pathogen of potatoes, is also it can also infect petunias. This is very high risk, particularly if you buy in vegetative material from another greenhouse. So if anyone wants to go this route, the first thing I say is you must start your own seeds in your own greenhouse, because then if you have a problem, you know who to plant. So exclusion. If we're going to do this, we have to scout this regularly. But if really we're looking at pest management for a vegetable crop, we'd be better off excluding those flowers. This is another form of exclusion for me. These are high-tunnel peppers, and we use black plastic and drip irrigation. But between our rows, we mulch very heavy with, in this case, a rye straw. And what we do there is we keep down dust, because there's a lot of foot traffic here and there's no rain. So those walkways become very dry and dusty. And by keeping down dust, we reduce our spider mite problems. So this is another cultural control we have, mulching for mite control. We can also do some facility management to exclude insects, such as screening here. Anyone see a problem with this picture? About 3/4 of the tunnel is not screened. So this really isn't going to do much for us. There are screens that are available for insect exclusion for greenhouses. They do reduce passive ventilation considerably. So if you're growing in a true tunnel with no fans, you need to look at can my crop tolerate this decreased ventilation. But thrips control is possible with a very, very fine mesh. I'm not sure I'd want to put that on a high tunnel without fans. I was in one of the sessions yesterday and we heard about bacterial wilt of cucumbers. And this is a variety trial from a few years ago with high tunnel cucumbers, and all of those plants have bacterial wilt. And the issue there is excluding the vector of bacterial wilt, or what the insect that carries it, which is the striped cucumber beetle. Here's another great cultural control: pruning. I love pruning tomatoes. In my hometown, I'm known as the tomato butcher. These people have taken it a little bit too far in terms of the amount of pruning that they've done. They're way up in here. I'd rather see this pruned somewhere down in here. But every time we prune a tomato plant or a cucumber plant and we remove the foliage, we're exporting problems, because the lower part of the plant is where a lot of our problems start. For insects, mites, thrips tend to start in here as they're moving up and down from the soil. So as I move those lower leaves out, I'm moving pests out. Diseases, botrytis, that sort of thing, as these leaves senesce, they're more susceptible to getting secondary infection like gray mold. And again, pruning is a great way to reduce pests and diseases. Next tool in our toolbox, plant resistance. So we have some plants that are less attractive to insects and some that are simply more tolerant. And the best example of this is with cucurbits or cucumbers. In this case, this is a seedless variety. It's non-bitter. It has a low level of a chemical called cucurbitacin. Cucurbitacin is what attracts the striped cucumber beetle, and we have less striped cucumber beetle problems on a non-bitter cucumber. So we might think about selecting varieties that are less attractive. This is an example of where we found one variety of tomatoes was more susceptible to spider mites than another one. And we didn't know that going into that research. This was just a variety trial. We found there's real differences between varieties and how much damage they show to spider mites. Grafting. This isn't a grafting talk, but I just want to mention that grafting generally is thought of as a way to increase yield and deal with root-borne, soil-borne diseases. It can also, in my opinion, be used as a tool for dealing with insects or mites. In this photo, you can see blocks of grafted plants, which are nice and green, compared to the non-grafted plant, which is yellow. So not only does this plant lack the vigor of its grafted counterparts, it's much more susceptible to spider mite attack because it's growing slower. And so the plant is much more yellow, not able to photosynthesize as much. And so grafting there gave us a jump on these mites. And of course, grafting is famous for giving us huge yields. In this case, our ungrafted was 9.2 pounds per plant versus 27 pounds per plant for our best treatment of grafting. Some of that has to do with mites, not all of it, but some of it. Rotation. How do we rotate inside of a high tone or a greenhouse? Who has an idea? How do we do that? Fred, go ahead.
We rotate between greenhouses.
So you have more than one. And the idea is what do you do when your one is in, say, rotation? What's going on inside there?
When it's out of tomatoes.
Yeah.
Well, we grow other non-family crops.
Yeah, non-solanaceous crop, something aside from tomatoes. Very good. So one strategy is to have multiple houses and use them for different crops, different years. What else could we do?
Move them.
You can move them. That's a great idea. And that's, again, kind of an up-and-coming thing inside of high tunnels. There's several commercial models out there now which can be moved. In this case, it moves on a pipe. And we know rotation is good for pest management in the field. Somewhere along the road the last 10 years, we kind of forgot that for greenhouses or high tunnels and said, hey, we can grow these things year-round. Have income coming out of it year-round. We can do that, but is that really good for soil health and for disrupting pest cycles? Of course, we know it's not good. It's a professional crop in the same soil. So this is one way to rotate. Simply move the thing over different soil. And the soil that's not actively growing, say tomatoes, cucumbers, anything else, could be growing something like a grass or a totally unrelated crop.
Judd, could I ask a question
Go ahead.
about that last?
Yeah.
I know it's not about movable tunnels, but are those wheels applied, are they permanent, or you just put them on when you move?
No, they stay there. They stay there. So this thing goes up and down this track, and at each position, then there needs to be a way to anchor it. I can give you another piece. I probably show you maybe 4 or 5 slides of these things off of the tracks too. So this is very, very interesting idea. It's great for soil health. For me, it's really the upper end of vegetable growing. And I think people should learn to grow in one place first before they start trying to grow in 2 or 3 different spots. Because it requires really a high degree of management and a little bit of money. We can also have a rotation in place. This is a cover crop in the summertime, and this tunnel is going to grow greens, winter greens. And so we're not having any vegetables in there during the summertime. We're growing something that's much less attractive to, say, aphids and thrips and that sort of thing. When we incorporate this now, we find we really don't need a lot more additional amendments. So this is a great way for me to use a high tunnel in the summertime if I'm growing winter greens and have a rotational crop. So those are some of the tools that we would really think about implementing before we ever began to spend money on sprays or biological controls. Now let's get into biological control. These are spine soldier bugs, and they're fighting over, what's this? Colorado potato, very good. This is on an organic vegetable farm. This happens to be eggplant. And if you've grown eggplant, you know that Colorado potato beetle should have been called the Colorado eggplant beetle because it does like eggplants better than potatoes. True. But on this farm, I could find these on just about every eggplant in, say, 100 row feet. And they were not introduced, they were there on their own, and they were actively controlling these Colorado potato beetles. Very fun to watch. I think the reason they had such excellent predation going on that farm was because it was also a U-cut flower. It was a CSA farm, and for their CSA members, twice a week they would come. You cut however many flowers you want. Really kind of a neat idea. And then you pay so much for a bouquet. Good deal for the farmer and good for the consumer. I think all that diverse habitat for beneficials like this was probably creating a type of environment where really these were kept in control on the run without any introduction. In tunnels and greenhouses, though, we need to jumpstart that process. So we like to introduce things at times. So biological control is really beneficial arthropods. I can't say insects because we do use beneficial mites, and the mites not insects. But you may catch me saying beneficial insects at times. Biological control is very well researched in greenhouse settings. High technology greenhouse settings in Europe, they've been doing this for decades. It's a well-established system. Different pests have, each pest has maybe up to half a dozen different biocontrols that can be released for those pests. However, biocontrols are not sprays or pesticides, so there's not an immediate result always. And like a lot of organic methods, we want to use them preventatively. Let's talk about those beneficials. If we're going to work with these, we need to understand a couple of major distinctions. First is predators versus parasitoids. So a predator goes out there and eats its prey, consumes it. Parasitoid has a life cycle that somehow disrupts the life cycle of the pest that we're trying to control. Within predators, we have specialists and generalists. Of course, a specialist generally has maybe one or two types of prey. The generalist has a broader range of prey. Why would we use these biologicals? They work when you rest. So this is a picture of my son and I out fishing on Lake Ontario. And I don't know if you can see it, but the reason I like this photo is because he's rowing and I'm fishing. So we can go out and go fishing, and I don't have to be walking around with something on my back pumping and spraying. We released it, and it took a matter of moments. And that action is going on. The beneficials are doing their work while I'm doing something else. There's no risk of burning plants. We can burn plants or have phytotoxic reaction on plants with organic sprays very easily. There's no re-entry interval. There's no pre-harvest interval, and they work. To drive home the point that they work, again, this is a 5-acre facility in southern Ontario growing cucumbers. It's hydroponic. They use conventional fertilizers. It's not even close to being organic. However, their pest control is nearly 100% organic because they rely on biologicals. They don't have to. They have very strong things in their arsenal if they choose to use them. That they use, conventional growers would use biologicals, is a pretty strong indication that they can work. Now I mentioned these systems were developed in Europe in controlled environment agriculture, controlled environment greenhouses, where our relative humidity and our temperature follows a fairly narrow set of parameters that are perfect for plant growth and line up with what we want our biocontrols to do. In the Northeast, our greenhouses or tunnels tend to be smaller. They tend to be more passive in terms of our environmental controls. And there's a very well-kept secret about a high tunnel or a single layer of polyethylene on a set of steel, which is that the interior temperature can actually go below the outdoor temperature on a clear, still night. This is counterintuitive. I didn't believe it when I saw it, but this is a known phenomenon among greenhouse engineers, is that a single layer of polyethylene will conduct heat so quickly that the inside air inside of a closed tunnel on a clear, still night, it can't recharge with warmer air from outside. And unless the soil is very warm, you're going to, in a sense, supercool that tunnel or that greenhouse. So we have very wide swings in our temperature in our greenhouses and high tunnels in the Northeast. The challenge that presents to us using biocontrol is that the more aggressive or best documented biocontrols out there tend to be specialist predators. Specialist predator has a fairly narrow relative humidity and temperature regime that it works in. And if our greenhouse is heating up and cooling down, and relative humidity is all over the place, it's very hard to keep those specialists going. So, if we want to use biocontrol in a low input greenhouse, we have to think about beneficials spelled with an E. Given this presentation at least a dozen times, that's the first I've seen it. We need to look at generalists. Why? Generalists predators tend to be able to deal with some swings of temperature and relative humidity better. We're going to have to release more often, and we might think about creating some habitat for those. So that is all the background getting you into the research I'd like to share with you, and it's on thrips control in greenhouse. This is thrips. This is an insect. I didn't take that picture. This is a very important photo. There we go. We have a couple species of thrips, western flower thrips and onion thrips. It's what we call cosmopolitan pest. It goes on to everything that you can think of. And one of the problems with thrips is it transmits a couple of important viruses. Thrips damage is easily confused with nutrient deficiencies, or in some cases disease. And a lot of times I've had people say, what is going on with these cucumbers or tomatoes? And when we turn over the leaf, we can find thrips. I like cucumbers inside of high tunnels because they can harvest sunlight up here. And if I look at this as a vertical cropping environment, it's a good cropping. That's one of the reasons I like tomatoes so much, is that my canopy goes up. And this represents much more production than the same footprint would in the field because I'm able to grow vertically. So there's my cucumbers inside of a high tunnel. I have a preference for specialty varieties. This is a seedless or an English cucumber called Predatory. And the nice thing about cucumbers is in the spring in the Northeast with long days we can grow them at very high density. So when we look at all these factors and say a 30 by 96 foot structure, 3,000 square feet, I can really pack in these plants pretty tight, only for spring planting. And if you can believe it, this is based on my variety trial work from 2011, we can get 65,000 pieces of fruit out of that structure. Now, how many people in the room sell cucumbers? Yeah? What's a fair price for a cucumber?
I guess we sell them for about, in the food store, for about $1 a piece.
$1 a piece. Is that a long type or is that?
No, a medium.
A medium cucumber. $1 a piece. Well, you're about to triple my economics. Anyone else? Opinions on price?
It's the same, $1 a piece.
$1 a piece? I'm really glad to hear those prices. I talked to a vegetable farmer about this last year. He's been in commercial produce since the 1970s. When he started out, he was selling cucumbers 4 for $1. And guess what he sells them for today? 3 for $1. 4 decades later. So, anyway, if we go 3 for $1, this is our gross revenue out of that tunnel. This is our input costs. I have fantastic revenue on this crop. This is my return per square feet. I recognize very few people are going to grow an entire tunnel full of cucumbers if you're in, say, retail produce. However, when I talk to successful vegetable farmers, they're looking at what is the return on a per acre basis, per square foot basis, and the return on a per square foot basis for cucumbers is very high. So the point I'm trying to make is this is a high value crop. Thrips can be very detrimental to it, and this is the beneficial mite that I worked with, Amblysudus cucumbers, sometimes called Neoceolus cucumbers. This is commercially available. This is how it comes. This is from IPM Labs in Locke, New York, where actually I think they grow these and sell these. And it comes with a vermiculite or a sawdust-like carrier. Pass that around. I had a digital microscope up and I wanted to actually project some live images of these things. My laptop was working and the projector was working, but the mice, I think they're all dead. They're very small. You can see them. I can see them with the naked eye. It's nice when you use a microscope. I just can't see anything alive here. We'll talk about that in a second. They can come in a canister like that, you shake them out into a tunnel, and they go and find their prey. Or they come in these sachets, and then they crawl out of these sachets and disperse that way. Again, very low labor input. All you have to do is pick up the FedEx box off your porch, open it up, hang these things out on the cucumber plants, and the cucumbers go out and do their work. It's a generalist predator, so it is a predator. It's eating its prey. It attacks juvenile stages of thrips, so it can't quite get the big ones. They're about the same size, so it's an even fight. So there's going to be a bit of a lag when you release them. They're going to go after all those juveniles. Eventually, we'll get to a point where the adults will die and there'll be nothing to replace them. The great thing about cucumeris is that it survives on other things. It can survive on pollen. It can survive on other insects or mites that it happens to find. And in my experience, it's the cheapest biocontrol out there. This is a great one to get started with if you want to begin doing this.
Good.
Questions? 10 minutes? Great. I started this work in 2007, and we were counting close to 400 thrips per block in this research project. Never let your thrips get this high. That's ridiculous. So we released cucumeris here, here, and here, and we crashed that population. This is a tremendous success story. Go from hundreds per leaf down to 0. That gives me a lot of confidence in the work we were doing. Within a couple of years, however, we developed a little bit more finesse with our system, and instead of just throwing 3 or 4 releases, we were able to get it down to 2, and you can also see that our number of thrips per leaf is 2 magnitudes of order lower. So we improved our management as this project went on, and we're again able to crash populations, this time without ever letting them get too high. In that case, 2 releases. The bottle that's going around has 10,000 in it, and these are released at 10,000. So one small bottle like that. But how much does one of those cost? You can get that shipped to your farm for under $50. So that was a few years.
You're going to say $150 or under $50?
Under 50, 50. Yep. Results. Out of 23 people that we surveyed, 20 had adopted biological or natural pest control. Some of the responses: natural pest control can save an entire crop. Less time, works 24/7. Seems to do a great job, great public relation tool. I can't quite put a dollar value on my crop, but I can say we were able to control the mites and beneficials to the point where we can continue harvesting. So the lessons are: scout often and order your beneficials very early. And you have to know what are your suppliers' deadline. One company I worked with, you had to have your order in by noon on Tuesday, and if I did that, I got a Friday delivery of my product. If I got my order in at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, I got my shipment the following Friday. So it's very important to know what those deadlines are and have scouting scheduled around when you need to get those in. A lot of people try this and there's some failures. Probably the most common one is the pest level is too high when they start, and they're starting too late. Poor quality and reliability of the natural enemies. These were alive last night when I looked at them, and they weren't alive today. Well, I didn't find any today. I imagine something's alive in there. So, you want to get these out onto your crop as soon as you get them. Now, the next question is, how does this apply to wintertime growing? Well, I mentioned earlier that our high tunnels get very cold on clear, cold, still night. So this tunnel, without any additional heat in it, at night is getting quite cold. However, if we use a row cover like this is a single layer of a mid-weight row cover, we can have air temperatures which are much better than they are outside. So these are from Ithaca, New York. Let's take the coldest night on the chart. That was January 11th. Our outside air was -9 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the high tunnel above this row cover, we have 4 degrees. Underneath we have 21. Below we have, in the soil we have 33. This is still too cold for the cucumeris that I'm talking about. So we have to begin to think about some other organic options besides the release of beneficials in the wintertime. These are a couple of organic products that we're now working with in a new project where we're looking at what are the appropriate methods for controlling pests in low temperature situations. And if you grow greens in the wintertime in New York State, I want to know you. I want to chat with you about what your pest problems are. And if it's possible, I would like to work with you on developing some solutions for them. This is my email. This is a woman I work with, Katie. She helps me on these projects. And I have a poster downstairs on this cold temperature pest management project. We're just getting into it. We've completed 1 full year, so I don't have all the data that I have on those warm season crops. But again, I look forward to working with anyone in the room. So thank you. Do we want to do questions now?
Yeah, we can take a few minutes questions.
Yes, in the back.
Any beneficials you'd recommend for cucumber beetle in the high tunnel?
No.
Darn it.
That's a question, a common question, and there are natural enemies of cucumber beetles, but they're not commercially available and reared in mass that you can introduce like this. It remains probably our biggest problem for insect pests for cucumber, for organic vegetables.
Surround kaolin clay on them when they're young, at least, and reduce the amount of heat.
Yeah. Yes?
I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on the potential of biological control in non-covered environments. So I work with community gardeners in New York City and Brooklyn primarily, but they tend to have a lot of the same pest problems that you would see in greenhouses, even though they don't cover. So the white flies are rampant, two spotted spider mites on tomatoes. I'm curious what you think. If you don't have things covered, how much will the beneficials stay there? Are there things that you could plant, like floral borders, that would support them, or make it more attractive for them to stay there?
Well, I would encourage you to look into it. I don't have experience with that myself. I do think you would probably tend to lose those. We do have a hard time keeping them, even in a tunnel, which is passively ventilated, so we have these large roll-up slides. We have problems with what we're releasing there going outside. So I would guess that you would. I think better than buying something and having it come in on its own. So I would encourage you to, plant as many flowers at different heights and different structures as possible. Yes?
Oh, Judson, Carol Blaster from ICAM Labs is doing some studies like that. Carol Blaster from
Carol,
ICAM.
yeah, that's IPM Labs.
She's actually got some SARE grants looking at that.
Yeah, that's where I got these from, IPM Labs.
And if not only her, there might be another researcher, but she's in it. So check. Thank you.
You mentioned the insect screens, releasing beneficials and having the, in case the whole high tide is turned into something that would highlight cucumbers, highlight.
Yes.
With insect screening, all four sides. Because the insect screening would allow some air to come through, so hopefully it wouldn't get too hot in there, or have shade cloth yet over the top of the tunnel to keep it a bit cooler in there during the summer.
You can dramatically reduce cucumber beetles with simple household screens, fairly fine mesh household screen on your roll-up sides. And if you're dealing with greenhouse varieties of cucumbers, those are bred for, they're high tolerant, they're tolerant of high heat. They can deal with that situation. Getting beyond that, if we use a insect mesh that is fine enough to exclude thrips, really wouldn't want to have that on unless I had some forced ventilation, because that's quite fine to exclude thrips. Cucumber beetles, you can't keep them out, but the problem is, are you going to have a whole tunnel planted to cucumbers that can tolerate that reduced ventilation, or are you likely to have 1 or 2 rows and then you compromise the health of your tomatoes?
Just along those lines, we are doing some high tunnel work in Richey, Rhode Island, and we had one tunnel last year that we screened using old shade cloth because we had bumblebees in that tunnel and honeybees in the 2 adjacent tunnels, and we didn't want the 2 fighting over each other. We didn't want honeybees in a bumblebee tunnel. And that was perfectly effective at keeping cucumber beetles out. We had lots of cucumber beetles in the other two tunnels, but none in the screened tunnel. And it also did not significantly increase temperature, although we did find increased humidity and as a result, increased powdery mildew.
Great point. I was given the charge to talk about insects today. You definitely want powdery mildew resistant variety of cucumber when you grow inside the tunnel. Absolutely must.